So I'm going to continue discussing cycles and a little bit more philosophical perhaps than you're used to, but the idea of where do cycles come from and what do they do and how do they project the information that's coming up in history and time. And it really is structurally ultimately connected to the structure of the universe and how planets move in circles. And if you look closely, nothing's really going in a straight line. The Earth is moving, the moon is moving around the Earth is moving around the sun is moving around the center of the galaxy. And ultimately there's cycles within cycles within cycles. So to isolate one cycle and say it's going to repeat forever is not a possibility. But given the context is never going to be identical, there's going to be similarity in the sense that cycles are repeating, and difference in the sense that not all of them are in the same phasing. And so ultimately, what you need to do is understand where the bigger cycles are, and what the bigger cycles are likely to do is more likely to repeat, because ultimately the bigger cycles are slower moving and they tend to incorporate more planetary sameness. What does that mean? So we know that the planets are moving around in their orbits, and to somehow or other, some people believe that the planets affect human psychology, human behavior, and potentially even more than that. We certainly know the seasons are coming every season. We know when the seasons are going to come. We know that they come pretty much within the same time frame. We didn't create that. It's not psychological. It's actually quite real. In the same way, there are subtler values that repeat. When people experience different moods and different experiences emotionally and psychologically, they're also reflecting oftentimes changes in the planetary positions. Having studied this for a long time, I've become quite clear that quite a bit of what we think is haphazard and random is not. So the large cycles, what I'm talking about, maybe are multiple thousands of years long, and there are shorter ones and shorter ones and shorter ones, and you can go down to a very short period of time with microseconds and tiny, tiny increments of time that are measurable on the level of quantum mechanics and such. But what we need to use on the level of human activity are cycles that are generally within the human life expectancy. And in the Vedic astrology system, human life is dominated by generally 120-year life expectancy, and they use a system of measuring time based on a 120-year cycle. The name of it is called the VIMSHOTTARI DHASA system. DHASA means time chunks, and VIMSHOTTARI was a particular format for the divisions of time, the divisions of the 120 years. And the 120-year cycle is divided into 9 planetary cycles. Each one is a certain number of years. The sun period is 6 years, moon period is 10 years, Mars period 7 years, and such. And the cycle continues all the way until Venus is the last one, is 20 years. And based upon the position of the moon at birth in a person's birth chart, determines where they are in the sequence. And you can start anywhere in the sequence. You could start right near the end of the sequence, and then it continues after the Venus period ends. It starts with the sun again. So looking at that 120-year cycle, you can see that that must be important in human life. If the Vedic astrologers believed that a human life was only 120 years or less, but countries and entities like the price of wheat and such have been traded for thousands of years. And so the cycle of 120 years may be repeating very, very consistently within that time frame. And within that time frame, 120 years ago from 2021 would be 1901. So one of the validations and verifications I use is what happened in the stock market, and using a 120-year cycle to look at some of the influences that are happening now. Turns out what's interesting is if you look at the last 12 months in 2021 in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it's 91% correlated with the market action from 1900 into 1901. So much so that the best match, I have a software program that generates the best match, it comes out within 1 day of 120 years as the best fit. The computer does this. There's no subjectivity involved. It just measures moving averages and lengths of moves and all this kind of thing. So the fact that 1901 is repeating in the stock market, it kind of indicates that the 120-year cycle is real. And twice the 120-year cycle is 240 years, and that's particularly interesting in that the United States of America began ultimately in 1776. The Declaration of Independence and such, and the Revolutionary War began in 1776. And 2 times 120 plus 1776 yields 2016. Note what happened in 2016. We had Donald Trump was elected, and the country went into a state of chaos, both because there were people who were polarized for him and polarized against him, and there was this huge upheaval that's beginning to, still hasn't resolved itself. The polarization is still very, very clear. But this is a recycling of the beginning of the United States. The psychology of intense, passionate, kind of revolutionary beliefs and conservative beliefs to try to hold on to the past, similar to England being the past back then, and the kind of the colonists becoming the George Washington and such, moving forward to try to create a new future for the country and a unity for the country. And so there's another example of how this period of time mirrors the time of the revolutionary period. 1776 is 2016. We'd now be in 2081, in 1781, mirroring 2021. And the war didn't end until 1783. So this period of chaos may continue a couple more years before it begins to resolve and we have some sort of stability. Now, if you take the 240-year cycle and divide it into thirds, which is, in astrology is oftentimes connected to the concept of sameness. 1/3 of a cycle tends to repeat the same qualities that the whole cycle does. 1/3 and 2/3 and 3/3 are in the sense sameness. And 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, the quarter points of a circle tend to be opposite or tense in relationship to the starting point. So right now, if you look back 1/3 of 240 years, which is relevant to the United States because the Revolutionary War started in 1776, you have back from 2020, you have 1940, and then before that, 80 years earlier than that is 1860, and then 1780, and then before that you have 1700, and then 1620. All these were significant war periods. In 1940-41, that was the beginning of World War II. 1860-61 is the beginning of the Civil War in the United States. 1780-81 is still in the middle of the Revolutionary battles, so they were very intense still and beginning to get even more intense. In 1700, there was what was called the Great Northern War in Northern Europe, and it was a tremendous battlefield for a number of years. And then go back another iteration of 80 years, you get 1620. And in 1618, there was the famous 30 Years' War that went until 1648. And 1648 was kind of the end of this phase. But that time period, 30 million people died in the 30 Years' War. So it was a huge war. And so this war cycle of 80 years and the Revolutionary period and the 120-year cycle are all lively. They're all connected, and they're all occurring again in the modern world in which we live. So this is a very, very powerful, very interesting, and very transformational time period that we live in. And it's something that needs to be continued to observe, because the patterns that were happening in 1941 through 45, in 1861 through 65, in 1780 through 85, the next 5 years are likely to have pieces or repetition of patterns that existed back then. Why? The reason is ultimately the planets. It's somehow that these planetary orbits combine in a systematic way to create these multiple 80-year, 120-year cycles, 240-year cycles, and even much, much larger ones. And if you watch those planetary positions and go back in history and study the events in history, you'll find rather remarkable periods of repetition of things that you would not imagine are connected. And over the next days, I'll start doing some more discussion of historical patterns. In the meanwhile, take a look at 1901 through 1904, and you'll see the stock market went down. And you'll also see that 1940 through 42, the stock market went down. And if you look in the 1860s, a similar pattern happened. So you can expect the economy is going to be affected as well, cyclically in this way. And people are worried about inflation beginning, and it may be a valid expectation. Okay, if inflation begins, what happens? Well, the stock market's not going to be happy initially because interest rates will go up and people are going to have the ability to generate income without any risk. So why put money in the stock market, which is going to generate 5 or 6% a year on average? Recently, since the last 20 years, by the way, that's all that you would get. The last 10 years, you'd get a lot more. But if you look at the last 20-year period, the average gain per year is around 5%. So if the interest rates go up to 5%, well, who wouldn't want to make 5% for sure in the bank when you have to take risk, where you could lose 30 or 50% in a bad year in waiting for the stock market to give you profits? So it's going to be a very dramatic influence on the whole world, because the governments in the United States and the other European countries and the rest of the economies in the world are not interested in inflation happening, and they'll do everything they can to stop it. But these cycles are not man-made, and they're not interferable to the extent that humans would try. So you can expect that what's supposed to happen is pretty much going to happen. On that note, let's call it a day for now, and I'll continue this theme next time. By the way, if you do like these videos, let us know. Give us a thumbs up signal. And you're welcome to subscribe and continue to watch them. And also, there may be opportunities for you to mention your comments underneath. There was a chat box there that you can add some points and some discussion. Thank you.